Hi, I'm Dana Sparks, broker with Maximum One Greater Atlanta Realtors. And this week's contract tip, in continuing with our theme, has to do with the changes that GAR has made to the 2016 purchase and sale, well, all of their forms, but today I'm going to go over the 2016 purchase and sale agreement. They did not make many changes, but I will go over the few that they did make. The first thing that they changed is, again, in response to TRID, the new TRID laws. With the TRID laws, as you know, the lenders are preparing the buyer's closing disclosure, and neither the lenders nor the attorneys are allowed to share those closing disclosures with the agent or any other party to the transaction other than the borrower. So the only place you can get it is directly from that buyer who is getting an institutional mortgage from a lender. So what GAR has done to try and help out you as an agent and brokers who need to close out their files, because we need copies of everything, is GAR has added on to the front page of the purchase and sale agreement, paragraph 13, A13, consent to share non-public information. And it states, buyer and seller hereby consent to the closing attorney preparing and distributing an American Land Title Association estimated settlement statement combined to buyer, seller, brokers, and brokers affiliated licensees working in this agreement for their various uses. So basically what that means is there is a form. If the closing attorney is using these ALTA forms, and ALTA stands for the American Land Title Association, basically, there is a closing disclosure prepared by the lender for the buyer. There is another closing disclosure prepared for the seller, typically by the closing attorney. Then there is a third form, which a closing attorney using these ALTA forms has availability to, and it is a combined form that combines the seller information and the buyer information on one document. It just does not have the specific information to the buyer, such as the buyer's loan rate, interest rate, things like that. What this stipulation is stating is that the parties are granting the closing attorney permission to share this combined form with you, the agent, and with the brokers as well as the other parties. It's a good try. We will hope that that will help you as an agent and your brokers get copies of all the information they need on these closing disclosures. The issue is, nowhere on the contract does a closing attorney sign the contract. So a closing attorney is not held to whatever is signed here on the purchase and sale, because they don't sign anywhere here. So just want to let you know that is a new addition to the purchase and sale agreement, but whether the closing attorney complies or not is totally up to them and their policies. The second change that GAR has made on the actual purchase and sale agreement is in paragraph 8, B8, where it talks about the return and disbursement of earnest money. In paragraph 8A, where it talks about entitlement to the earnest money, subject to the paragraph below, the buyer shall be entitled to the earnest money upon failure of the parties to enter into a binding agreement. That has not changed. 2, this is where the change, failure of any unexpired contingency or condition to which this agreement is subject. So GAR added the term unexpired contingency. Further on in that paragraph, the GAR made the addition, again, we're in paragraph B8B, and it talks about if there was a dispute over the disbursement of earnest money. So for example, there's a TNR, the buyer and the seller do not agree. The holder of the earnest money ends up dispersing the earnest money to the seller as liquidated damages if the buyer, upon a buyer's default. What GAR has added is a broker may require the seller to sign a 1099 before issuing a check to the seller. So again, I had a little bit of a question about this with GAR when I was taking the training on the new contracts, and it seemed to me that I was curious as to why the broker is sending a 1099 to the seller when it is the buyer's money that the broker was holding in trust. And the explanation from an accountant that had been in the room was, well, as the holder, if there is a dispute, the holder has the ability to disperse the funds to the seller. So therefore, the money at some point in the succession of the money, it did go from the holder holding it in trust on behalf of the buyer, totally being the buyer's money, because it was ended up in dispute, and the holder has the authority to make the decision to disperse it to the buyer as liquidated damages. At some point along that progression, it does become the property of the holder to then disperse to the seller. Therefore, the holder does now have the authority to send a 1099 to the seller. So if there are disputes in 2016 and the sellers are getting the earnest money, just let them know that the brokers, before dispersing the earnest money, may be requiring a W-9 from them so that the holder can send them a 1099 at the end of the year. Another change that GAR made is in paragraph C4 under other provisions. It actually defined NA. There are a lot of times when agents, as you know, not to leave a blank space, anything blank in your contract. And so a lot of agents were putting in the letters NA, and that had never been defined in the contract. So under terminology, GAR states, in the GAR contract, it states this is paragraph C4E, terminology. As the context may require in this agreement, 1, the singular shall mean the plural and vice versa, and 2, all pronouns shall mean and include the person, entity, firm, or corporation to which they relate. The letters NA, if used in this agreement, shall mean not applicable, except where the context would indicate otherwise. So they have actually defined what NA means. If you've taken our contract classes, then you know if there is a fill in the blank that requires a dollar amount, you know if it requires a dollar amount not to put in NA but to put in 0 to indicate that the buyer and the seller did in fact negotiate that dollar amount, and they did negotiate it to 0. Additionally, the GAR redefined binding agreement date to try and make it a little bit easier to understand, because believe it or not, there is still a lot of controversy and issue over what the binding agreement date is when we actually do have a binding agreement. And so this has been defined in the notice of notification of binding agreement date, and GAR went ahead and defined it in this same paragraph, C4F, binding agreement date. And again, it just states, the binding agreement date shall be the date when a party to this transaction who has accepted an offer or counteroffer to buy or sell real property delivers notice of that acceptance to the party who made the offer or counteroffer in accordance with the notices section of this agreement. Notice of the binding agreement date may be delivered by either party or the broker working with or representing such party to the other party. If notice of accurate binding agreement date is delivered, the party receiving notice shall sign the same and immediately return it to the other party. So again, binding agreement date is the term that we use for the legal concept of meeting of the minds, and it is notice of acceptance. It is when all the parties know that the negotiating is done, not when the last party agrees to the last terms, but when all parties know, when there's notice of acceptance. So again, they just redefined it. The other thing that they did add is they added delivered to either party or the broker working with or representing such party. So what that encompasses is a broker who is working with the public in a customer relationship. So representing such party would mean that the broker has a client relationship with the seller by virtue of a listing agreement, or a client relationship with the buyer by virtue of a buyer brokerage agreement. Working with indicates that the broker is working with the public as a customer, working with the seller as a customer by virtue of authorization to show unlisted property, and working with a buyer as a customer by virtue of the customer acknowledgement. So that is a change. It used to be notice to an unrepresented party had to go directly to that party by virtue of an email address or fax or delivery to their address. So now the broker working with, that's a new addition to this year's GAR contract. So those are all the changes to the actual purchase and sale. If you've been watching this series on the 2016 GAR sneak peek contract tips, then you're aware of the other issues that we have been discussing. Maximum One is hosting several classes on the 2016 GAR called the 2016 GAR Contract Dissection, and I will link right here the link to our calendar where you can see and register for those classes. First one is Friday, January 8th. And we have them at least in every Maximum One branch throughout January, and we will continue the series throughout the next few months as well. So thank you so much. Again, Dana Sparks, broker with Maximum One Greater Atlanta Realtors, satisfying your needs with service, innovation, and education. Happy New Year, everybody.